The plane descended through a quilt of gray clouds, the engines thrumming a steady hymn that drowned out the scattered voices of the passengers behind her. Elena Vasquez pressed her temple against the cold, oval window, her breath fogging the glass as she traced the jagged outline of the coastline below. It was a VYEW she hadn't seen in year 7. To be exact, one she hadn't missed until this moment. The green-gray sprawl of the Pacific Northwest sharpened into focus, a familiar patchwork of forest and river she'd once called home. She hadn't planned on feeling anything. This return wasn't born of longing or nostalgia. It was a practical decision, a closing of one chapter and a reluctant reopening of another. Her contract in Chile overseeing seismic retrofits for a series of aging bridges had ended 3 weeks ago, and with it, her reason to stay abroad. The land waiting for her back in Washington state was just that, land. A deed with her name on it, a tax bill paid on time, a physical anchor she'd maintained from a distance without much thought. But as the wheels kissed the tarmac with a sharp screech, something tightened in her chest, a sensation she couldn't name and didn't want to. She wasn't sentimental. Elena had spent her career building things that lasted, soul VYing problems with steel and concrete, not chasing ghosts of memory. Yet here she was, stepping off the plane into the damp, evergreen-scented air of SeaTac, her boots hitting the ground with a thud that felt VY-er than it should have. Home, she supposed, in the most technical sense of the word. 2 days later, she rented a battered pickup truck from a lot near the airport and drove north toward the property she'd inherited from her father. The road was a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by towering pines, their skeletal branches clawing at a sky that threatened rain. Her breath puffed in the cab despite the heater's feeble hum. Late March still carried the bite of winter here. The lot sat along a slow-mo VYing river called the Stillwater, a name that had always struck her as ironic given its tendency to flood every spring. Her father, Miguel Vasquez, had lived there for decades, a solitary man who'd preferred the company of the river to people. When he died 6 years ago, the property passed to Elena almost as an afterthought, a single page while scratched out in his uneven hand. No explanation, no ceremony. She'd been in Santiago at the time, knee-deep in a foundation audit, and had handled the transfer remotely. A local company was hired to check the place quarterly, mow the grass, patch the roof. She kept it functional, paid the taxes, and let it sit there like a dormant seed she had no intention of planting. The truck rattled over a gravel-sere VYC road that wound toward the riverbank. The sound of loose stones crunching under the tires, a faint echo of childhood summers spent chasing minnows along the shore. Elena adjusted her grip on the wheel, her knuckles whitening as she rounded the final bend. She wasn't sure what she expected, maybe the cabin's weathered cedar siding, the crooked pier jutting into the water, the rusted wind chime her father had hung on the porch, but it wasn't this. Nothing. She killed the engine and stepped out, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The air was sharp with pine and the faint tang of metal, but the landscape before her was wrong. Where the cabin should have stood was a flat expanse of rolled turf, meticulously leveled, as if someone had ironed the ground smooth. No debris, no charred remains, no hint of a life that had once rooted itself here. Just absence. A garbage bin bolted to a concrete pad sat near the property line, and beside it, a wooden sign in a crisp, corporate font, Stillwater Greenway NVY Environmental Protection Zone. No trespassing warnings, no explanation, just a sterile declaration of what this place had become. Elena stood motionless, her breath catching not from emotion, but from the sheer absurdity of it. In her jacket pocket, her fingers brushed the old brass key she'd carried from Chile, the one that had once unlocked the cabin's back door. She'd brought it with her out of habit, a tether to something she hadn't bothered to define. Now it felt like a punchline. She pulled out her phone instead, snapped 3 photos-wide shots of the empty lot, the sign, the river beyond, and climbed back into the truck. Her hands didn't shake. Her pulse didn't race. This wasn't a moment for reaction. It was one for EVY Denke. Back in the cab, she fired up her laptop, tethered it to her phone's hotspot, and pulled up the county's online records. Within 10 minutes, she confirmed what she already knew. The property tax bill, paid in full 4 months ago, still listed her as the owner. Elena Vasquez. No liens, no transfers, no disputes. The parcel hadn't been sold or reassigned. So how, she wondered, her jaw tightening, had it turned into a public greenway? By the next morning, Elena was at the county recorder's office in Everett, a squat brick building that smelled of stale coffee and mildew. She'd spent the night in a cheap motel off the highway, her sleep shallow and interrupted by the hum of trucks outside her window. Now, armed with a binder of document stacks, receipts, the original deed, maintenance invoices, she stood at the counter, her posture rigid but calm. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a perpetually distracted air, took her paperwork with a grunt and began pecking at his keyboard. "It says here," he muttered after a few minutes, squinting at the screen, "your property was folded into a pro-VY Sinal conservation easement last year, part of a Riverfront stabilization project. Notices went out, standard procedure." Elena's eyes narrowed. "I never received any notices. I've been out of the country for years. My mail's been forwarded to a legal firm in Seattle. They didn't get anything either." The clerk shrugged, his fingers hovering over the keys. "System shows the letters were sent to the property address itself. 3 certified attempts, no response. That's all it takes for them to move forward." "Of course they were sent there," she said, her voice flat. "It's been unoccupied since my father died. I updated my contact info with the county 2 years ago. If they ignored that, it's not my oversight, it's theirs." He glanced at her, then back at the screen, as if hoping it would argue for him. "Look, I just see what's here. Says the request came from the Stillwater Restoration Collective. Community group. They flagged it for erosion risk, got it reclassified. That's all I've got." Elena left the office with a photocopy of the easement record and a headache pulsing at her temples. The collective's name meant nothing to her, but the pattern did. A convenient loophole, a stack of unopened letters sent to a vacant lot, a box check to justify the takeover. She'd seen this kind of bureaucratic sleight of hand before on projects in Chile, where local officials bent rules to favor developers but never on her own ground. It wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. By noon, she was seated in a glass-walled office downtown, across from a land use attorney named Rachel Kim. Kim was a wiry woman in her 40s, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her movements quick and precise. She skimmed Elena's binder with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades untangling county red tape. "They can't demolish a structure without your consent unless there's a condemnation order or an emergency declaration," Kim said, tapping a pen against the table. "Did they issue either?" "No," Elena replied. "Just this easement nonsense." "Then we got a starting point. I'll file for full disclosure demolition permits, environmental reports, notification records. If they can't produce a clear chain of authority, we'll push for an injunction to freeze whatever they're doing next." Kim's tone was brisk, no trace of pity. Elena liked that. This wasn't about feelings. It was about leverage. As she left Kim's office, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your truck." She froze, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. The parking lot was half empty, the pickup sitting where she'd left it under a flickering street lamp. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a plain envelope, thick and unmarked. She opened it standing there in the fading light, her breath VY sible in the chill. Inside was a single sheet of paper printed on letterhead from the Stillwater Restoration Collective. The text was polished to a sheen. "We're pleased to inform you that your parcel has been successfully integrated into the Stillwater Greenway project, a VY tile step in preserving our region's ecological future. Your contribution is appreciated." No signature, no contact info, just a name at the bottom in bold type. L. Carver, project coordinator. Elena folded the letter and slid it into her pocket, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the words that struck her, it was the delivery. Someone had tracked her here, waited for her to step inside, and left this on her truck like a taunt. This wasn't a courtesy notice. This was a marker. That night, Elena checked into a small rental house on the outskirts of town, a single-story box with peeling paint and a VYEW of the Stillwater through a gap in the trees. She didn't unpack beyond her laptop and a change of clothes. The place smelled of dust and pine cleaner, but it was quiet, and that was enough. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter from the collective spread out beside her, and began mapping the timeline. First, she pulled up the county's public records on the Stillwater Greenway project. The trail was thin, vague press releases about sustainable riverfront management, a few photos of smiling locals at a community meeting, a map with her lot shaded in green, but not named. She screenshot the map and saved it to a folder labeled EVY Denke. Next, she dug into the Stillwater Restoration Collective. Their website was a masterpiece of blandness. Stock images of wetlands, a mission statement about community-driven conservation, and a board of directors listed only by initials and last names. Ed Carver wasn't among them. By midnight, she found a buried document in the county Archivisa shoreline overlay adjustment proposal passed during a July meeting 2 years ago, when most residents were likely at the beach or barbecues. It allowed community entities to reclassify vulnerable riverfront properties for environmental purposes if owners didn't respond to notices within 90 days. A soft seizure dressed up as stewardship. Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. Her father's cabin hadn't been vulnerable. It had stood for 40 years, reinforced after every flood. Someone had wanted it gone, and they'd built a legal trap to make it happen. The next morning, she drove back to the lot, parking the truck at the edge of the gravel road. The air was damp, the river's surface rippling under a slate-gray sky. She walked the perimeter, her boots vying faint prints in the turf. The absence of the cabin was stark, but what caught her eye was a new addition, a gravel path cutting through the western edge, leading down to the water. She followed it, her steps deliberate, until she reached a shallow embankment. The shore had been regraded, lined with riprap stones that gleamed wetly in the light. A sign stood near the bank, its logo sleek and corporate. Future Site Stillwater Observation Deck. Below it, a QR code. Elena scanned it. Her phone opened a promotional page touting restored public spaces and sustainable partnerships. Sponsors included the Collective, a regional consulting firm called Cascade Solutions, and a developer she recognized, North Point Ventures, a name tied to luxury waterfront condos up the coast. She screenshot the page and added it to her file. This wasn't a greenway. This was a billboard for something bigger. As she turned back toward the truck, a glint of metal caught her eye near the southern boundary. She crouched, brushing aside the grass to reveal a small stake driven into the ground, marked with orange tape and the code NV01. She photographed it, her mind already turning. NV, North Point Ventures? It was a guess, but it fit. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the rental house, not by mail, but slipped under the door while she was out meeting Kim. It was another Collective missive, this time signed by L. Carver in sharp black ink. MS. Vasquez, we understand your concerns regarding the transition of your parcel. We're prepared to offer compensation above market value for your cooperation in finalizing this process. Please contact us to discuss. A phone number followed, along with a deadline, 48 hours. Elena didn't call. Instead, she handed the letter to Kim, who read it with a faint smirk. They're nervous, Kim said. This is a preemptive strike. They want you quiet before we dig deeper. Then let's dig, Elena replied. Kim filed the injunction that afternoon, citing lack of due process and unauthorized demolition. Elena spent the evening cross-referencing the Collective's board initials with public records. One name surfaced, L. Carver, listed as a consultant for Cascade Solutions in a decade-old environmental impact report. No photo, no bio, just a thread connecting the Collective to the consulting firm on the QR code site. It wasn't proof, but it was a crack. The next morning, Elena woke to a voicemail from an unknown number. The voice was male, smooth, and faintly accented East Coast, maybe. MS. Vasquez, this is Lucas Carver with the Stillwater Restoration Collective. I'd like to meet in person to discuss your property. We're reasonable people. Call me back. He left the same number from the letter. She didn't call back. Instead, she drove to the collective's listed officia refurbished storefront in an industrial strip near the highway. The glass door was locked, the interior dark except for a single lamp illuminating a minimalist desk. A sign taped to the window read, "Closed for renovation." She took a photo and left. That night, a car idled outside her rental for 20 minutes, its headlights off. Elena watched from the kitchen window, her phone recording the plate number as it finally pulled away. She didn't sleep much after that. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.